Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into a world before alarm clocks, before coffee machines, before that sacred slice of toast hit your plate, back when breakfast didn't even exist. You wake up in a monastery somewhere in medieval Europe, centuries before the word breakfast was even invented. It's still dark, the kind of dark that feels like velvet pressed over your eyes. The air is cold enough that your breath fogs out like incense. The bell hasn't rung yet, but you're already awake because you're hungry. And tonight, you're going to find out exactly how monks turned hunger into holiness and how their habits quietly shaped the way you eat every morning without realizing it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now where you are? Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle through the cloister hall. Stone floors, faint smell of beeswax and damp wool. The brothers are already moving in silence, their habits brushing the flagstones. The first bell hasn't struck yet, but they're all heading to the chapel for matins, the earliest prayer, usually around 2 or 3 in the morning. Yes, that early. The night itself feels half frozen, and your stomach grumbles like it's auditioning for a sermon on gluttony. But here's the thing. In the medieval mind, eating too soon after waking wasn't just rude to your digestion. It was defiance of divine order. The first thing you did in the day wasn't feed yourself. It was feed your soul. Breakfast was not a right. It was a privilege. And in this monastery, that privilege didn't come until the sun had fully risen, the prayers had been said, and every brother had earned his bite through obedience. The rule of Saint Benedict, written in the 6th century, didn't mention breakfast at all. Food came when it came, often once or twice a day, depending on the season. In winter, maybe around midday. In summer, closer to the 9th hour, around 3 p.m. That's right, for many monks, the first meal of the day wasn't until well past lunchtime. And here's the kicker. This wasn't considered fasting. This was normal life. Imagine the rhythm. Matins before dawn, lauds at sunrise, prime when the first light hits the chapel windows. Hours of chanting, scripture, labor. The smell of wet parchment, candle soot, and human breath warmed by prayer. All before a crumb of bread touched your lips. You start to realize these men didn't skip breakfast to lose weight. They skipped it to earn grace. Historians still argue whether this strict fasting schedule was born from spiritual purity or just practical survival. After all, monasteries needed to conserve resources. Food wasn't endless, and fasting doubled as good management. Some scholars even suggest that early Christian fasting rules were just clever ways to ration supplies through long winters without anyone admitting it outright. Still, there's something deeply human about that gnawing hunger in the dark. You picture yourself kneeling in the chill of dawn, whispering psalms while your stomach complains louder than the organ. A younger monk beside you tries to stifle a yawn, his robe fluttering in the draft. You catch his eye, and for a brief second there's a tiny flicker of shared rebellion. Do we really have to wait until sext? Look, a bell rings. Not breakfast, not yet. Just another signal that time itself belongs to God. Monks didn't measure hours with clocks. They heard them. Bells carved the day into sacred intervals. To modern ears, it sounds beautiful. To your empty stomach, it sounds like torture disguised as music. You step outside after prime. The sun is pale, still climbing. Mist curls across the garden, where herbs and vegetables wait under frost. The air smells faintly of thyme and wet earth. The kitchen door is closed. From inside, faint clinks of metal and murmurs. The brothers on kitchen duty preparing the day's simple meal. Barley bread, beans, maybe a small piece of cheese if it's a feast day. And yet, even here, temptation hums in the background. You spot a novice sneaking a glance toward the kitchen window. His hands are folded, but his eyes betray him. He's thinking about food. You would be too. But he knows the rule: no eating until after the third prayer cycle. Break that, and it's not just disobedience, it's a sin of the flesh. Funny thing is, you already follow a version of this rule every day. You just call it something trendier: intermittent fasting. You stop eating at night, sleep through the holy hours, and eat again sometime after waking. You're a modern monk with a smartphone instead of a rosary. Of course, medieval fasting wasn't about metabolism, it was about meaning. Hunger wasn't the enemy, it was the teacher. It reminded you that your body was temporary, your cravings deceptive, and your willpower divine. Every skipped bite was a small sermon about control. But even monks had limits. In harsh winters, fainting during prayer wasn't uncommon, so abbots quietly adjusted the rules, maybe a small piece of bread with watered wine in the morning for those doing heavy labor. A mercy disguised as discipline. The human body always wins, eventually. And here you stand, centuries later, still eating in their shadow. The word breakfast literally means breaking the fast. The fast they started wasn't just overnight, it was spiritual, cosmic, constant. Outside, the bell tolls again. The sound echoes through cold air like a heartbeat. It's time for terce now, the third canonical hour. You follow the brothers into the chapel, your stomach empty, your thoughts heavy with the rhythm of time, faith, and food. As the chanting rises, you realize that breakfast, that quiet act of sitting down with food in the morning, began not as a pleasure, but as an act of release. You're not just eating to live, you're breaking the silence, the obedience, the fast, the same way monks once did when the day finally forgave their hunger. The bell rings again, lower this time, rolling through the stone corridors like a reminder that time itself belongs to someone else. You follow the brothers to the refectory, a long, echoing room lined with benches, wooden bowls, and the faint smell of cabbage. You're finally about to witness the moment you've been waiting for, the breaking of the fast. Except, you quickly realize it's not what you imagined. There's no chatter, no steam rising from mugs of coffee, no butter melting on fresh bread. The room hums with a sacred kind of emptiness. Everyone stands until the abbot gives a nod. Then, as one body, they sit. One brother begins to read aloud from scripture, his voice floating above the clinking of spoons. No one else speaks, no one dares to. You glance at the food, a bowl of lentils, a heel of bread, a thin slice of cheese. That's it. And yet you see their faces, calm, serene, almost satisfied. They aren't eating for pleasure, they're eating for permission. The fast is broken, but only within the narrow space allowed by the rule of Saint Benedict. It's strange, isn't it? That one man's instructions, written in the 6th century, could decide when half of Europe got to eat. Saint Benedict wasn't trying to make anyone miserable, at least not on purpose. His rule was meant to balance prayer, labor, and study. Monks were supposed to live moderately, neither starving nor indulging. But moderation in the Middle Ages meant something closer to hardship. According to the rule, meals came twice a day, sometimes once, depending on the season. The idea was that you should eat enough to survive your duties, but not enough to forget your humility. Too much food dulled the soul, too little dulled the mind. Somewhere between those two hung salvation. Historians still argue whether Benedict intended his fasting schedule to be literal or symbolic. Some say he borrowed the rhythm from Roman meal customs, where prandium, lunch, and cena, supper, were standard, but breakfast was considered childish or weak. Others argue that he was shaping a new spiritual rhythm entirely, replacing the pagan day with a divine clock. Whatever his intent, the result was the same. For nearly 1,000 years, the Western world learned to eat like monks. You might laugh, sitting there in your modern kitchen with your granola and almond milk, but the echoes are still there. The idea that you shouldn't eat too early, that skipping a meal builds character, that restraint equals virtue, all that trickled down from the cloister. The monks measured holiness in hours, and those hours eventually shaped how everyone lived. The bells told peasants when to plow, when to rest, when to eat. A kind of spiritual scheduling system spread from monastery to marketplace. Even the word noon comes from nuns, the ninth hour of prayer, originally around 3 p.m., before shifting forward as daily life changed. Every tick of your modern clock hides a shadow of the bell tower. You watch as the brothers eat, slow and deliberate. One of them lifts his bread, closes his eyes, and whispers grace so softly it sounds more like breathing than words. You take a bite yourself, or you imagine you do. It's rough bread, dense and dry, the kind that makes your jaw ache a little. But it's honest food. It fills without flattering. A small reminder that pleasure isn't the goal. Obedience is. Still, the human body never stops whispering its own rules. Some monks fainted during long fasts. Others quietly adjusted their rations. There are records of abbots caught sneaking extra wine or salted fish for medicinal reasons. Theologians debated whether fish broth counted as breaking fast, and if so, what about eel soup? For the record, opinions were divided. Eel soup, possibly sin-adjacent. You start to sense a pattern here. The medieval appetite wasn't just about food, it was about control. Every crumb was weighed against morality. Every bite carried consequence. You couldn't just be hungry, you had to be righteously hungry. One fringe account tells of Cistercian monks who measured virtue by portion size. The smaller the slice, the purer the soul. That's right. Holiness, quantified in breadcrumbs. Imagine trying to out-humble your neighbor by eating less stew. You lean back against the cold stone wall, listening to the sound of spoons scraping wooden bowls. This isn't a breakfast. It's a performance, a ritual of restraint. The table becomes an altar, and every bite a confession. But it wasn't all misery. For monks, fasting carried strange comfort. Hunger gave rhythm to their lives, a heartbeat that connected prayer to labor, dawn to dusk. It turned time itself into something sacred. After the meal, the brothers rise again, bow and file out in silence. You follow them into the cloister garden. The light has shifted. Warmer now, dust motes spinning like slow-moving stars. A few brothers are assigned to the orchard, pruning trees, collecting herbs, trimming the vegetable beds. You can smell mint and soil. It's almost pleasant. A younger monk, maybe 18, 19, glances over and grins. He's not supposed to, but he does. And you catch that small, wordless spark of humor between you, a shared understanding that hunger makes fools of saints and saints of fools. He mutters, just loud enough to hear, "The belly is a stubborn disciple." Then he's gone. You think about that line as you watch them work. The belly, a disciple. That's exactly how the rule worked. Your stomach became your teacher. Each grumble a sermon, each skipped bite a confession. You learn patience one hunger pang at a time. And whether you realize it or not, you've inherited that legacy. Every no food after midnight rule, every fasting trend, every guilt-ridden glance at the fridge. It's the echo of that same discipline. Monks didn't invent self-denial, they just turned it into a schedule. You look back toward the refectory window. The light flickers inside, candles being snuffed, the faint glow of discipline settling back into order. The brothers will now move on to their next prayers, leaving the kitchen behind like a battlefield won through silence. The sound of a bell drifts across the courtyard again, clean and clear. And just like that, it resets the world. Another hour surrendered to heaven, another meal earned by time. You realize you're still hungry, but it's different now. Less about food, more about understanding. You can almost taste the idea that somewhere inside this hunger lies the blueprint for everything modern people call balance, health, or willpower. The monks didn't eat to fill themselves. They ate to measure how full they already were with faith. And as you walk back toward the chapel, the echo of your own stomach reminds you, the first true breakfast was never a meal. It was mercy made edible. You step beyond the monastery gates now, blinking as the morning light spreads across the village fields. The bells behind you fade, swallowed by wind and distance. Out here, life follows a slower clock. The rhythm of sun, soil, and survival. But even in the farthest huts and mud cottages, the monks' fasting hours echo like invisible chains. The peasants don't have the rule of Saint Benedict written on parchment. They don't read Latin, they don't chant matins, and they certainly don't live in silence. But their days, too, begin on empty stomachs. A peasant wakes before dawn, not to pray, but to work. He rolls from straw bedding, joints stiff, hands already cracked from yesterday's labor. His wife stirs the ashes in the hearth, coaxing a weak flame to life. There's no sizzling breakfast, no sweet smell of porridge or bacon, just the sharp scent of smoke and cold air. They call the morning meal breaking fast, but most days there's nothing to break. Maybe a crust of black bread left from yesterday, softened in ale if they're lucky. Most times, the first proper meal comes at midday, after hours of toil in the fields. The monks fast for holiness. The peasants fast because there's simply no choice. You watch a farmer kneeling in the frost, planting winter rye. His stomach grumbles as loudly as yours did in the cloister. But where a monk sees discipline, the farmer sees debt. A spiritual hunger turned practical. Historians still argue whether this overlap between monastic and peasant fasting was coincidence or influence. Did the church enforce the rhythm, or did necessity make the rules first, and the monks simply codified it? Either way, the result was the same. By the 10th century, much of Christian Europe moved to the same invisible tempo. A single shared appetite stretched across faith and famine. And that's where things get complicated. Because the church didn't just tell people when to eat, it told them what to eat and when not to. Lent, Advent, Ember Days, Rogation Days, a dizzying mosaic of fasting periods that could occupy nearly half the year. That's right. Almost half your calendar was off limits for meat. Imagine explaining that to your modern self, standing in line at a drive-thru. Fish became the fallback, not because it was abundant, but because it didn't bleed. The logic was theological. Meat came from warm-blooded creatures, symbols of passion and lust. Fish, cold and silent, represented purity. Eating fish kept your body humble and your soul chilled. And yet, even purity had its loopholes. In medieval Paris, records show people soaking beaver tails in wine and claiming they counted as fish, since, technically, the tail came from water. Monks kept pet otters for the same reason. You can almost hear the smirk in their reasoning. It swims, therefore it's fine. By noon, you wander into a village square. Smoke rises from chimneys, and a pot of cabbage stew simmers over a communal fire. People gather with wooden spoons, passing bowls like blessings. This isn't gluttony, it's survival turned ceremony. The rhythm of hunger structures everything: prayer bells, labor songs, even gossip. You overhear a woman joke that her husband fasts more faithfully than he prays, and everyone laughs, because that's how it is, faith and food intertwined. To eat was to admit you were human. To wait was to pretend you were more. You sit near the fire and dip bread into the pot. It's thin, barely flavored, but it's warm, and warmth counts as grace. Across the way, a young boy clutches his bowl like it's treasure. He looks up at you with a grin, teeth missing, eyes bright. The monks say hunger is holy, he says, but I think they've never been poor. You can't argue with that. Still, the monastery's influence runs deeper than theology. Over time, even markets and fairs adjust to its rhythm. The day's first food stalls open late, after prime or terce, when the monks would begin their work. The great bells signal not just prayer, but trade. When to grind flour, when to bake, when to collect eggs. Even the word noon keeps shifting earlier, matching the world's growing impatience. One fringe record from a 12th century abbey tells of a dispute over when to eat during harvest season. The workers demanded food at sunrise, claiming labor was impossible on an empty stomach. The abbot refused. God comes first. They worked 3 more hours before collapsing in protest. The abbot relented, and by the next year, a small concession appeared in the rule's local copy. Those who till may eat before terce. That was how slow revolutions began, not with swords, but with spoons. The more you walk through this medieval landscape, the more you realize how much appetite controlled the pace of history. Fasting wasn't just a religious act, it was a form of timekeeping. The monks had bells, the peasants had hunger. Both served the same purpose, to divide the day into something bearable, meaningful, even holy. Historians still debate whether this rigid rhythm made medieval people more resilient or more repressed. Some argue it built community through shared suffering. Others think it bred guilt that still clings to Western culture like a shadow. Either way, the legacy remains. Our sense of time, our breakfast, lunch, dinner, grew from a schedule written for saints and enforced by necessity. As the sun dips low, you hear another bell in the distance. It's the monks again, marking Vespers, the evening prayer. The sound drifts across the valley like a reminder that even the fields answer to the cloister. You watch the villagers pause just for a moment, spoons stilled, heads bowed. Then the moment passes. Life resumes. And you realize, whether through prayer or labor, every medieval stomach was synchronized by the same invisible hand. Fasting wasn't just about skipping a meal. It was about joining a cosmic rhythm, a slow, relentless harmony of want and will. As the fire fades and smoke curls toward the stars, you understand why so many believe that holiness had a taste. Not sweetness, not salt, but the sharp edge of hunger, softened only by grace. Tomorrow, they'll rise again before dawn, and before the first bite of bread, before the first sip of ale, they'll listen for the bell. The same bell that tells them not just when to pray, but when they're finally allowed to be human. The sound of the bell follows you back inside the monastery, echoing off the stones like a metronome that never forgets. You've seen the peasants mimic the monks, living in rhythm with prayer and hunger, but now something new stirs in the air. Change. Time itself, that old obedient servant of the church, is starting to shift its loyalty. You find yourself standing in the refectory again, only this time it's not dawn. It's late morning. The brothers are busy with small chores, wiping tables, sweeping the floor, feeding the chickens. And there in the corner, you notice something unusual. A monk quietly sipping from a small bowl of broth before the noon bell. You glance around. No one stops him. No one scolds. The abbot pretends not to see. It's a quiet rebellion disguised as practicality. The medieval world was starting to loosen its belt. Historians still argue whether the idea of breakfast was born in monasteries or outside them. But what's certain is that by the 14th century, the fasting schedule began to bend. Work hours were lengthening, populations were growing, and dawn to noon fasting simply didn't suit the new rhythm of life. The bell schedule stayed holy, but the stomach started bargaining. The church called it collation, a small permitted snack or drink to sustain you between prayers. Originally, it meant listening to spiritual readings from Cassian's collations while sipping watered wine. But monks being monks, that light refreshment gradually expanded. A bit of bread here, a handful of fruit there. Before long, breakfast had quietly snuck through the back door of the monastery and into the mouths of the faithful. You can almost imagine the scene. A sleepy brother in the kitchen, stealing a heel of bread before matins. Another heating milk for the infirmary, but accidentally pouring a little extra for himself. Hunger, like grace, always finds a way. And outside the monastery, the world followed suit. Artisans, merchants, laborers, all began bending the sacred hours toward practicality. You picture a blacksmith striking his forge at dawn, hammer ringing louder than the church bell. His apprentice arrives with a small jug of ale and a bit of bread, muttering that he'll eat for strength, not sin. That small excuse was enough to transform 1,000 years of ritual. The first meal of the day, once forbidden, then tolerated, was slowly baptized by necessity. Bells still tolled, but they no longer commanded absolute obedience. They marked the day like old teachers whose pupils had grown too clever to fear them. And then came the turning point, the invention of mechanical clocks. Around the 13th century, the first tower clocks began ticking across Europe, replacing the monastery bell's soft authority with the sharp insistence of gears. Time was no longer holy, it was measurable. You could own it, divide it, even sell it. With that shift came a new appetite. Cities woke earlier, markets opened sooner, and meals began to creep forward. The fast still broke late for monks, but for merchants and masons, breaking fast started meaning something closer to mourning. Imagine the confusion. For centuries, people had equated eating before noon with sin. Now it was becoming smart, even healthy. A farmer might laugh at his ancestors' monastic guilt while gulping down warm ale and cheese before heading to the fields. A scholar in Paris might nibble on bread before lectures, calling it a study aid. The vocabulary of virtue was quietly rewriting itself in every kitchen. Historians still debate how long it took for breakfast to become socially acceptable. Some claim it wasn't fully embraced until the 17th century. Others insist it was common centuries earlier, but rarely recorded because, well, who brags about cheating the fast? Either way, you can trace the moment it took root. In one monastic chronicle from the 15th century, a weary brother complains that the young men eat before the bell, saying their bodies require it. You can almost hear the sigh in his ink. He knew he was watching tradition unravel one mouthful at a time. Still, not all saw this as corruption. Some argued that if fasting was meant to teach humility, then understanding human weakness was part of the lesson. A few abbots even began adjusting meal schedules during hard labor seasons. Hunger had been a symbol of holiness, but so now was mercy. And mercy tasted a lot like warm porridge. You wander through the kitchen where the new rhythm hums softly. A pot of grain bubbles over the fire. A brother stirs it slowly, adding milk with a wooden ladle. The smell, nutty, sweet, familiar, fills the air. For the first time, breakfast doesn't feel like rebellion. It feels like comfort. The bell tolls again. It's late morning, and the sound mingles with bird song and the faint clang of work in the back courtyard. The monk smiles at you and says, "The Lord blesses the hands that work, even the ones that stir." Then he winks. You can't help but grin back. Outside, the village mirrors the same scene. Markets open earlier, bakers rise before dawn, children sneak crusts from the oven trays. The fast is breaking everywhere at once. But there's irony here. The word breakfast doesn't appear in English until the 15th century, right when monks are still debating whether the morning meal even counts as sin. It's as if the world decided to name something before the church could outlaw it. A small rebellion, baked into language itself. You can almost hear time speeding up. The rhythm of the bells replaced by the click of gears, then by the pulse of human ambition. The silence of fasting gives way to chatter, trade, and the laughter of workers sharing their first bite of the day. Breakfast wasn't just a meal. It was the world deciding it no longer needed permission to live on its own clock. Still, the monastic shadow lingered. Even now, people say I earned this breakfast after a morning jog, or I shouldn't eat too early with quiet guilt. Deep down, you still believe restraint equals virtue. That's the ghost of Saint Benedict whispering through your cereal spoon. As you look around the bustling kitchen, the transformation feels complete. The bells still ring in the distance, but their meaning has changed. Once they commanded obedience, now they merely remind. You sit by the fire, cup of warm milk in your hands, and realize the truth. We didn't invent breakfast. We inherited it, smuggled out of monasteries, disguised as mercy, sanctified by appetite. And as you take a slow sip, steam curling in the dim light, you can almost hear those old bells fading into the hum of 1,000 morning kitchens. The sound of humanity, finally breaking fast with the dawn. You wake again, this time in a far different kind of dawn. No bells, no Latin chants echoing down stone corridors. Just the buzz of a refrigerator, the hiss of a kettle, and the soft electronic glow of your phone on the counter. Somewhere in the distance, a morning news anchor declares breakfast the most important meal of the day. And you can't help but laugh, because now you know who really came up with that rhythm. You stretch, bleary-eyed, standing barefoot in your kitchen. The air smells faintly of coffee. You reach for a bowl, pour out cereal, splash in milk, and for a moment it feels mechanical, automatic. But as you stir the spoon through that simple swirling pattern, you realize you're reenacting something ancient. Not the slogan, not the marketing, the ritual. The monks would have called this moment Collationane Spiritus, the gathering of spirit. You might call it autopilot. Either way, it's the same instinct, to begin the day by tending the body after a night of stillness. The journey from the cloister to the kitchen table took nearly 1,500 years, and it wasn't a straight path. Breakfast, the meal once forbidden, became first tolerated, then normal, and finally sacred again. Only this time, the god was commerce. It started innocently enough. During the Reformation, Protestant reformers, Luther, Calvin, and their lot, mocked the Catholic obsession with fasting. Why starve when God had given the world so freely? Work, not hunger, was holiness now. And work required fuel. So eating early became a sign of discipline, not indulgence. The belly, once suspect, was redeemed through labor. Historians still argue whether this was theology or PR, a way to separate Protestant industriousness from Catholic asceticism. Either way, it worked. By the 17th century, the morning meal was a badge of virtue. Eating early meant you were efficient, productive, godly. Not fasting became the new fasting. And by the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution sealed the deal. Factories didn't wait for bells or prayers, they ran on shifts. Workers needed calories before sunrise, not grace at noon. Suddenly, breakfast wasn't sin or sanctity, it was survival, again. The marketing followed. Kellogg, a devout Seventh-day Adventist doctor, preached purity through diet, whole grains, no meat, no stimulants. His invention? Cornflakes. A monk's restraint turned into crunchy convenience. He called it food for temperance. A century later, advertisers called it part of a balanced breakfast. You glance at your cereal box and wonder how many monks would have approved of cartoon mascots preaching moral fiber. One of the more curious facts about this era, many early breakfast foods were marketed not just as healthful, but spiritual. Clean eating, simple living, early rising, all those habits had roots in monastic self-control. Even oatmeal was once promoted as the food of the disciplined, the humble. You can almost picture Saint Benedict on a Quaker Oats label if history had a better sense of humor. Still, not everything modernized smoothly. The guilt lingered. Skipping breakfast became shameful. Eating too much became sinful. And every diet trend since has felt like a remix of monastic fasting with Wi-Fi access. Intermittent fasting? Old news. The monks perfected that centuries ago. Detox cleanses? Just call it Lent with hashtags. Clean eating? A secular song. Historians still debate whether our current obsession with healthy routines is science or inherited penance. Do we eat in rhythm with biology, or are we still following those invisible bells? You check the clock. 7:03 a.m., the hour once reserved for lauds, morning prayer. Your spoon pauses midair, milk dripping back into the bowl. In a way, you are praying, just not out loud. The hum of your fridge becomes the low drone of a Gregorian chant. The clink of spoon on bowl, a kind of metronome for thought. The act of eating, rhythmic, mindful, almost sacred. You start to realize humanity never stopped fasting. It just changed the reason. Where monks sought grace, you seek focus. Where peasants sought survival, you seek balance. And yet every morning we all break the same fast. The silence between dark and day. A quirky footnote. The medieval church once declared that eating too early risked inviting demons of sloth. The modern world just calls that skipping leg day. Different vocabulary, same theology. You sip your coffee, that bitter sacrament of the modern age, and think about the arc of all this. How breakfast migrated from the monastery to the marketplace, from holy discipline to consumer ritual. The monks listen for bells to tell them when to eat. You listen for notifications. Both, in their own way, are calls to order. Reminders that time still owns you. And yet, beneath all that structure, something beautiful remains. The simple, primal gratitude of beginning again, the taste of warmth after darkness, the quiet rhythm of breathing, eating, thinking, existing. Maybe that's what Saint Benedict was after all along. Not punishment, not control. Just a rhythm that reminded the human body it belonged to something greater than appetite. You finish your cereal. The spoon clinks softly as you set it down. Outside, the city hums awake. Cars, voices, footsteps, all falling into that same invisible tempo. You think of the monks chanting in stone halls, the peasants waiting for the bell, the merchants grabbing bread before the forge, the workers in smoky factories with tea and toast. And now you, glowing screen in hand, spoon in bowl. All of it, one unbroken chain of mornings. The candlelight of the cloister became your kitchen lamp. The fast of faith became your first meal of the day. And though you may not wear a habit or whisper prayers before dawn, you still live by their rhythm, every bite a quiet echo of their devotion. So now, as you sit in the dim calm of your own morning, let it all slow down. The centuries you've walked through, the stone corridors, the frostbitten fields, the ticking clocks, fade softly into one steady pulse, the rhythm of breath. You hear it even now. The quiet repetition that binds every human life together. Wake, wait, eat, live. You've done tonight what countless generations did before you. You've waded through the dark and tasted the light. The monks didn't fast to suffer. They fasted to listen, to learn patience from hunger, gratitude from fullness. You do the same in your way, whether it's holding your first sip of coffee like a tiny sunrise or sitting silently before the day begins. Outside, morning edges in. Pale blue light slips between curtains, and the world feels just a little bit softer. The refrigerator hum fades into memory. You can almost hear a bell far away, calling you not to obedience this time, but to stillness. It's funny, really. You thought breakfast was just about food. Turns out, it's about faith. Faith that the day will meet you halfway, that warmth will return, that something worth savoring always waits on the other side of the dark. So take a breath, stretch your hands, let the hunger fade, not because it's gone, but because it's understood. And tomorrow, when you break your fast, maybe remember the monks. Not for their rules, but for their rhythm. The rhythm you've never truly stopped keeping.